Ms. Deepali Nair, CMO IBM India and South Asia. She is also a podcast host to a successful series called Being CEO with Deepali Nair. Before IBM, she led marketing and digital at IIFL Wealth Group of Companies. She was also a non-executive member of board at IIFL Wealth Finance. She has held leadership positions with L&T Insurance and HSBC. She has also worked with Tata Motors, BPL Mobile, was the marketing manager, Draft FCB Ulka, was the marketing manager for Saffola and Medicare at Marico. She headed products and marketing at HSBC Global Asset Management and at L&T Insurance. She was head marketing, e-commerce and customer service. Ms. Sneha Sharma, Indian racing driver, airline captain Indigo. Sneha Sharma, a commercial pilot with Indigo Airlines, is one of only 4 female racing drivers in India and boasts an impressive CV that includes being shortlisted for the 2015 Volkswagen Vento Cup and the Toyota Etios Cup in India. She has also had 6 race victories and 14 runner-up positions. She has also secured another 6 wins and 9 runner-up slots at the Mercedes Young Star Driver Program and is currently the only Indian female racing driver competing outside India. She hopes to advance in motorsport with the ultimate goal of reaching Formula One. Ms. Sara Curlew, Australian Consul General in Chennai. She is responsible for strengthening bilateral relations and trade and investment ties between Australia and India in the states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Telangana, as well as the Union Territories. Ms. Curlew is an experienced career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, posted to headquarters in Canberra from 2017 to 2020. Ms. Curlew worked on a range of policy issues relating to Australia's Indo-Pacific policy, including as Acting Assistant Secretary of the United States and Canada branch. She has also served overseas in Cairo and Beijing, the latter as Counselor, Economic G20.
Welcome to this important session, The Elephant in the Room. We often have a hard time talking about adversity, right? About a major challenge. But you know what? This pandemic has changed that for us. Work from home, which existed in small pockets for women before, has made us all take it as normal, and everything has turned digital too. So in this time when we are sitting together and thinking about what are some of the most important conversations to have, it looks like asking the difficult question, what has changed for women with COVID-19, is a subject that we all must think about and share ideas on. To do this, we have an amazing panel here with us today. And while Deepali, Sneha and Sarah, you share your thoughts on this topic of naming the elephant in the room, overcoming it, and then using it to our advantage, may I share with you my quick story of how I managed it in the pandemic. So I run a nonprofit, which is called Champion Woman. Global Adjustments Foundation is a not-for-profit business that helps women with life leadership programs to power themselves from within. So no matter what the world gives you, you can bloom where you're planted with emotional resilience and goal setting, work-life integration, topics like that. Now, when this pandemic started, we weren't used to being so tech savvy, as an NGO. And it was up to us to now figure out, do we close shop for a whole year and not help any women? Or do we go on with webinars and programs online so that we can make an impact with women? Suddenly, it became very clear that there was a silver lining in this situation. Naming the elephant in the room took up a lot of my time because we had to knock on the door of corporate India, colleges, and say, please give time for your women to do programs on mindfulness. And that is what we have as the very core of our curriculum at Champion Women programs. And once we started explaining what mindfulness would do, how we could spend maybe 30, 40 minutes together with people and have conversations, maybe share 2 or 3 techniques about it, it became very apparent that women were actually very keen on it. Because the truth is, it has always been important for us in India, all of us, to come back to look at our own mental health. But this new challenge made it mandatory now. And it became very important to look at the elephant in the room. By the way, speaking of the elephant, Did you women on the panel know that the elephant is one of the only few creatures in the world that can look at a mirror and recognize itself? So it's almost like the elephant in the room is calling out to us to say, name the challenge, seek the support you want, and recognize your true strength in the mirror. I'm so happy that people here today on the panel will share their real experiences and their wisdom so that all of you who are participating today in this program can enjoy their wisdom and translate it, applying it in your life. Deepali Nair, could I start with you, please? Would you please share your take on the topic of the elephant in the room?
Thank you, Ranjini, and so nice of you to share your personal story. And I think I'm going to do the same. 27 years ago, when I started working, there was no term called diversity and inclusion, which was there in the charter of the corporate organizations. I'm very glad that after 27 years, COVID or no COVID, that's actually become a topic of discussion. There is actually studies today which prove that diversity leads to, greater profits or greater revenues, and that it's good for business. So that's the progress that we've really made. I think I was one of the first two female management trainees that Tata Motors hired. My first job was with Tata Motors, but I think that's no longer the case. I'm very glad that, in the early years when I, reached the C-suite, I would often say that I'm the only woman on the table, there who's reporting into the CEO. And now I work for a wonderful company, actually, IBM, where there are many more women and, many more that support each other. Having said that, what has COVID done and what has really happened? I think it's brought to fore three things. One is that there is enough data for us to now know that more women have lost their jobs, during COVID than men, and also that they have probably found it a little tougher, to cope with what COVID brought to them. What COVID brought to them was that they needed to be, truly super women. And let's take the example of India. And this is the story of many women who are part of my team, my friends, my colleagues. I did a little bit of, conversation with about 20 plus women before coming to this panel. And what has happened in India is that women in India were very dependent on the working women, on the help at home, and that arm also got cut off. So it was not just working from home, but it was also the work that they used to do at home, which they never did themselves, was a double whammy, so to speak, that happened to them. And, push comes to shove, our self-identity comes from also the work that we do at home. So we can't wish it away. And, we are the primary caregivers. So taking care of family is a role that we've adopted and we can't wish it away. And therefore, I think that there was a double effort. So that's the first thing that happened. Second is what you mentioned, mindfulness, but I will go a step forward. I don't think mental well-being is as yet a topic which is commonplace and open for discussion, for men or for women. I don't think there the gender matters. I think the mental well-being of men and women both came to the fore thanks to what was happening, during COVID. I was pleasantly surprised. I got a call from an ex-colleague of mine who is now doesn't work in India, and she said that, listen, for my family, for the younger brother, can you actually suggest somebody that he could talk to? People are willing to talk to therapists, psychiatrists, corporate organizations are waking up to it. Mrs. Nija Birla runs a very strong initiative on mental well-being. So I think that's a second thing that became acceptable. I'm a very strong proponent that women, for example, should have mentors, sponsors, coaches, and three being different. I have had a exec coach, life coach since the year 2016. And off and on, I go to her. But in May of last year, I went back to her and I said, listen, I think I need to reframe what I'm doing at home, reframe what I'm doing at work, how I'm doing it, because my whole circumstances change and I need to transition. And in the past also, I worked with her when I'm transitioning from one job to another. So I really looked at it, from a transition perspective, and that really paid fruit. And the third thing, I think that's the most interesting thing that happened. Again, gender agnostic, although women scored, a new form of leadership qualities or new form of leadership really, was wanted. Everybody acknowledged that empathetic style of leadership or empathetic leadership genuinely, is required. There's a Harvard case study, which talks about how women have scored better in 360-degree assessments, how they've scored better on, the empathetic competencies. 13 out of 17 competencies, actually, women leaders have scored better, And there again, I just want to share, I think women found it easier. So this was not the tough one. Okay, so this is opposite from the elephant in the room. I think women leaders found it easier to share their vulnerabilities with their team. That definitely happened with me. We were far more acceptable of children and disturbances and home life and work life integration and so on and so forth.
Give me an example which is practical that corporates and people can learn from something that you did during COVID, which put your people first.
I actually had somebody in my team who took a break. The gentleman took the break because his wife works for the government and was required to serve during the COVID period. So he actually took a leave of absence of a couple of months and has now come back, to work when it is possible for him. There's another husband and wife couple who, for the first 6 months, went and stayed with the wife's family and now are staying with the husband's family and not staying in Bombay because they just found it difficult to cope. And I think the acknowledgement of all this and leaders acknowledging this is very interesting. And the very last example that I want to give is that for my team, we acknowledge that from breakfast till dinner, women and men are occupied. We actually decided that 1 hour in the middle of the day, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. is going to be a you time, we called it, and nobody's going to have any meetings during that time. And that was really, welcomed by the team. I think it was time. COVID made us realize that we needed to think differently about our leadership, about our mental well-being, and about diversity and inclusion.
Interesting, Deepali. So with the lenient statistics from the US, which tells us that 1 in 4 women are even considering downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce due to COVID-19, I'd love to hear from our other panelists. Neha, tell me about your take of naming the elephant in the room.
Yeah, I think the pandemic really did strike all of us really hard, more than what we expected, especially for my two professions, which are quite field-oriented and operations-based. So I race Formula cars and I fly airplanes. So both these jobs, sadly, there's no work from home. So it was really stressful. It was mentally quite challenging because I was doing a lot, racing, flying, doing other activities, talks, and I had to suddenly come to a screeching stop. So it affected me with all this free time, and my mind was running at say 100 kmph. It suddenly came to a 0 kmph. So it was quite stressful. And we were waiting for the air services to open. The racing has not completely opened yet. So I did do quite a few stunt videos and car reviews for car magazines, etc. But racing has still not come back to its pre-COVID levels. With flying around June, we started flying again. There were a lot of restrictions, a lot of COVID tests to be done by pilots, passengers, a lot of protective equipment to be worn. The way we did documentation in the cockpit changed, especially while flying overseas like Dubai and say Muscat, Oman, different places. We had to study their country's COVID restrictions. So it was quite stressful and added workload. But yes, I also heard a lot of women lost their jobs. And I think it's very important for a woman to be financially independent and independent in more ways than one. And having lost jobs is really not good because a lot of women across the world are exploited because they're dependent on somebody like a male counterpart or a male person. So it's been harsh, and I think especially in our country, a lot of house helps were not able to come at home, and I think all the workload went on the woman of the house, including the work, their work from home, plus the dishes, plus taking care of the kids and everything. So I think that would have really taken a toll on the woman's health and self-care. So that's what I think. But things are becoming better now with the flying. I think companies are hiring again in airlines. Pilots are being hired again, cabin crew as well. So it's improving a lot. And yeah, like you said, the elephant in the room was always that when a woman is successful or trying to be successful, she's tagged as overambitious or maybe conceited. But I think a woman has as much right to be successful as a man or any other human does.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sarah, you came in during the pandemic into India and established yourself as the Consul General of Australia. You moved with a young family. Give us your take on this, please.
Thank you, Ranjini, and thanks to my fellow panelists for the insights they've given too. I mean, I echo a lot of what they've said. As you said, I arrived in Chennai during the pandemic in January, in fact. So for most of the pandemic, I was at home in Canberra in my home department there, which is our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, equivalent to the Ministry of External Affairs for India. And, some of the work I was doing there was on just how gendered the impact of the pandemic will be. So, women were more likely to be exposed to risk because of the pandemic. 70% of global healthcare workers are women, often at the front line, providing community services. Also, the lockdown increased risks for women, including of domestic violence, and perhaps the services they were accessing were no longer as available to them. And as Sneha said, women are often in a less advantageous financial position. And so when they lost their jobs during COVID, they had fewer savings, fewer assets to rely upon. Girls too are disadvantaged, more likely to schools closed, but then, access to, if the family had only one device, which child would be able to continue with virtual learning? And I think that that's a challenge for all of us, women in relatively privileged positions, as we start to look past the end of the pandemic to economic recovery, how we will support women to get the services they need and access new opportunities. Speaking personally, the challenge of balancing homeschooling, childcare, a full-time job still, I'm lucky my husband is extremely supportive, and we worked out a kind of shift structure between us where one of us would start work very, very early in the morning while the other cared for the children. Then around the middle of the day, we'd switch and do the opposite shift in the afternoon. But it was very stressful. And I think it exposed how much women have come to rely on quite a fragile set of circumstances to allow them to pursue careers. We rely on family and paid help for childcare. We rely on schools. We rely on after-school care. And when all of those things were gone, there was no real structure there to say, well, women's work is still important. So you gave the statistic of 1 in 4 women thinking that it's just all too hard and perhaps they should stop work. And I mean, that's very understandable, but also once those women drop out, it will be hard to get back in given the tightness of the labor market. So also as employers, I think we have a duty of care to say to women, what can we do? What can we do to help you make this work for this period? Can we drop your hours to part-time hours? So at least you're still connected to office and you've got a base to come back. Can we give you better technology solutions? So one thing my home department had done, actually even prior to the pandemic, as part of our women leadership agenda, was to make sure people were able to work effectively from home, that they had laptops, they had access to the secure networks, and that they had communication devices. And I think making sure that people have those options, and as managers being understanding, it's really hard to juggle homeschool and Zoom calls at the same time. And I think the world has come a long way in that. And probably the next step is to say those things are equally available to men, and we equally expect men to take them up. So if as a family you're juggling all of the pressures of a pandemic and school and care and work, that both partners are taking an equal share of that home burden as well.
That's an ideal world. And I think sometimes the silver lining is that an ideal world will emerge from this crisis. So is there a lack of gender-sensitive responses that the impact of the pandemic has given? Do people really see it as gender agnostic? Should the approach be something different in this regard in corporate leadership?
I think to the rest of the world, they need to be gender sensitive. But to the women, I say this, that they need to think gender agnostic. They need to think when they're asking or when they want to be, treated equally, that it needs to be a gender agnostic place. And that's how, you evaluate the policies. But I think any policies, frameworks, planning that you do from a company perspective needs to be gender agnostic. But do we require male sponsors? Yes. Do we require male coaches, male mentors? Yes. So therefore, I think that is where you need to be gender sensitive.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So there's a general feeling that pro-woman reforms are always coming through. As an entrepreneur, I remember thinking, of course, I have to give 6 months maternity But what is that threshold? How much welfare do you think would be too much welfare for women?
That's a tough question. How much welfare would be too much? And I learned this at HSBC. Back when I was coming back from my, pregnancy sabbatical, they were implementing a lot of flexible policies, whether it was work from home or coming late to work and, so on and so forth. And I think that's the understanding that they had while implementing those, that if you really want them to work, they need to be offered to everyone. They need to benefit everyone. There is no reason why flexible working hours won't benefit the men. And we had very interesting examples where men chose to come at 8 a.m. to work because they used to drop the kids off to school. So I think that's my personal belief system that I learned from there. And at IBM also, whether it is work from home, whether it is a leave of absence, the example that I gave earlier of the gentleman who actually took the leave of absence to support his wife. I think they're more gender. I won't even say gender, because gender diversity is not the only one that matters across the world, really. I think in India, the topic is really gender, but inclusion across the world is about, age groups and ethnic communities and so on and so forth. So really all these policies have to work for everyone is my belief system. But Ranjini, the issue is not really that. I think the issue is that we as women sometimes have what I call limiting beliefs, and I think we need to rise above them. We are shy to ask for help. We don't feel entitled. We don't feel we deserve the jobs that are offered to us. And I think those are the kind of mindsets that we need to rise above. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there.
So it is said that every crisis has some opportunities. So let's talk about opportunities and positive aspects that women discovered for themselves from the pandemic. Is there something in that area for you, Sneha, as an airline pilot? How did you cope? Is there some, I know you told me you had the challenges, but what are some positive aspects that might have come now in your profession that you've seen?
What I realized during the lockdown was that it gave me a chance to develop a proper routine, because before the lockdown, the schedules had become really erratic. Say we wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and do up to 4 flights a day, which I thoroughly enjoy, but it gets too much sometimes. So I developed a routine. I learned to do fitness at home without equipment. So I did a lot of yoga and stretching, which I would not normally do. I would focus on strength training or cardio. So that helped me. I got back to cooking, a lot of my hobbies, which I didn't earlier have time for. So I started baking and things like that. I started educating myself on the technical aspects, theory aspects of flying and racing, because both involve high-speed machines. So having a background knowledge on both really helped. So that's how the pandemic helped me in a positive way.
That's wonderful. And when I met you pre-pandemic, you were single, and in the pandemic, you even got married. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah, that worked out. I got a lot of time for my personal life. So yes, we decided to tie the knot last December. So yeah, that was positive.
Congratulations. See, there's always opportunities. Wonderful. So Sarah, here's my question to you. Now they're talking about when targets are not met and people are working from home in that kind of scenario, will it really begin to affect the career growth of women, do you think? How is it in Australia, and what do you have to teach us in the rest of the world? Because what's visible is only not the effort that the woman is making, but only the results, which may not be what it could have been in the economic downturn.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you. And I think, first of all, to say that we've all been learning globally from each other through this pandemic. And I think one actual silver lining, we were just talking about this with Sneha and Dipali, is that the virtual seminars, the virtual connections make it much easier to learn from each other, to engage across time zones. We've moved away from thinking that we need to be together to share learning. And that's one silver lining for me. In terms of kind of productivity during the pandemic and whether we still looked to people to hit the same targets, I think we have to say that it's a job for leadership to be clear to people that no one can be expected to do the same level of outcome working under such difficult circumstances. But actually what I found in my personal experience is even when you gave that message to people, the desire to help, the desire to contribute meant actually people were achieving more than ever before, working from home, working under different conditions. So I think there's two learnings there. One is that you need to create a framework where you take the pressure off people and say, it's for you to let me know what you can do. Here are some kind of baseline things we expect to be able to achieve. And let's have a really honest conversation if that's not going to be possible. But the second learning is that when you take that pressure away, actually sometimes people exceed and they go beyond and they are able to deliver really strong outcomes, more than you would have thought. So hopefully we can continue that into the post-pandemic period as well.
That's great. So you're really talking about communicating more and stretching yourself the extra mile because you have to help the bigger, greater goal, right? And
yes,
to be
indeed.
kinder to the. Sneha just answered this question, but I'd like your take on it, Deepali. What are some opportunities or positive aspects that you think women have discovered for themselves in this pandemic from the corporate side?
Ranjani, one thing that I'm noticing is that a lot more women are finding, their other side, the alter ego, as I call it. So they're friends of mine who published books. They're friends of mine who went and did educational courses. They're friends of mine who got healthier, not me, but they got healthier. The focus on physical health, was there. There are women who were sitting at home, who become successful home chefs. Women who are running, classes which they never thought were possible earlier. And I want to give my own example. I'm being asked to write a book for the last 2 years on leadership and collaboration. Then came the thought that maybe I should write a column, and that has never happened in the last 2 years, although I've done enough research on the subject. Last year, in the midst of COVID, June 2020, I launched my podcast. It's now 25 episodes old. It's a best-selling show on Awaaz.com. It has filled me with such sense of pride and brought that, wondrous, childlike, excitement back into my life. And, the 25 CEOs are really who's who of Indian corporate industry whom I've interviewed. They talk about transformation, culture, learning. And I have no dearth of invitations from various B schools and forums such as these, to come and talk about those topics. But personally, they've been huge mentoring and learning opportunities for me. And many other women are doing very successful work like this. There's a lady I know who is 60 plus, and she is now into acting and filming and writing, post her retirement. So women are.
I guess our left brain and right brain. We started using both finally. Great. Thank you, Deepali. Right, both sides. Fantastic. And I just wonder, Sneha, if you have a take on how much equality do you think really exists between women among themselves? How do we view working professionals versus homemakers? We're always talking about gender equality between men and women, but how are we among ourselves?
The new era really wants to empower women and make women independent financially, mentally, etc. But a lot of time, I think homemakers are looked down upon in the sense that they're not doing much. But I was told once, raising a kid is a full-time job. And I think women are creating mature adults, assets to the world, which may be male or female, as they'll grow up and do great jobs in the world and in the universe. And that can only happen if a woman raises a child well, which can also happen by a working professional. But I think it's a personal choice if you want to focus on your kid and your personal life for a few years and get back to your job. And that's what's great about many organizations which are offering women this opportunity. Like Indigo just came up with a 2-week on-off contract. So you work for 2 weeks and you are at home for 2 weeks until your child turns 5. So I think that's a great policy. And I think many companies are coming up with help for working mothers like a creche and other childcare facilities. So I think there is a fair amount of gender equality amongst women. And I think a lot of women are uplifting other women like how we're trying to do right now.
Yeah, that's true. Tell us your story. How did you become an airline pilot, a racing driver, and shed, I don't know how many kilos to become super fit?
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a long journey. I started racing about 15 years back. I started with go-karting. I used to cycle really fast on the streets, and I knew there's speed inside of me. So I tried my hand at go-karting, which is the base entry level for all Formula One drivers or racing drivers across the world. So when I got in a go-kart, I really felt the adrenaline rush, and I decided this is how I want to continue. Then I tried to seek professional training, but I couldn't find any. So I learned from the local mechanics with whatever little they knew, like braking, cornering, overtaking. That's where I think being resourceful really helps to be able to do well even when the conditions are not very favorable. Then with this knowledge, I started participating in a lot of local races. I used to win these races and I got picked up by a national team. Then I did national karting, saloon car racing, formula car racing, and I recently became the first Indian woman to win an international race in four-wheelers for India. So that
Fabulous. Fabulous. Congratulations.
So just between my racing career, at the age of 17, I had to put down my helmet and go to the USA to pursue my flying studies. I went to San Francisco, California, and I learned basic flying like CPL and instrument rating, private pilot's license on the Cessna and other multi-engine aircraft. And then I came back, converted my US license to Indian license, and at the age of 20, I got through Indigo. And since then, I've been with them, and currently I'm flying as captain of the Airbus 320 nationally and internationally.
That is such an inspiring journey. So if a woman puts her mind to it, the sky's the limit. There is no glass ceiling, right? Your life shows it. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that personal story. Sarah, I'd love to hear from you. How did you become a diplomat?
Sure. And I think it's really interesting to hear so many inspiring stories around at the moment. So I joined our Foreign Service directly from university in the graduate intake. And then I've had a series of postings. So I was in Cairo. I spent 3 years in New Delhi. Then I had some time in Canberra. Then I was in Beijing, back in Canberra. And now I'm really pleased and proud to have been appointed as Australia's Consul General for South India, which has a big area of responsibility, all the 5 southern states of India. But I think for me, although I'm pleased and proud of my success, I'm also conscious of those who helped me along the way. So I often say to young women, you can't be what you can't see. You need good role models. And I was lucky enough to have some fabulous role models to support me on the journey, including our current head of our Foreign Service, Frances Adamson, who is an extremely experienced diplomat, but also the mother of 4 children. And I was lucky enough to work for her in Beijing when she was our ambassador there. Other really good mentors who've given me good advice. And I think sometimes just a senior woman telling you 1 or 2 things you need to hear at the right time. So some advice that I've received that I think is really important. 1, to pay what it takes for good childcare, because you don't want to be worrying about the care and quality of care for your children. The second is try and live close to your office. Don't spend time commuting. I mean, that's in the pre-pandemic days. Now we're all virtual. It's sort of less crucial. But I also benefited from a strong policy push from my department. We have a women in leadership strategy. And that said, in about 2014, our previous High Commissioner to India, Mr. Peter Varghese, went back to head our department in Canberra. And he looked at the data. And the data said that since the 1980s, they had been recruiting women at the same pace as men, 50-50, joining in the graduate intake. And yet somehow by senior levels, those percentages had gone right out. So they had only 27% of our heads of mission, which is like positions like mine or ambassadors overseas, were women. And they wondered why that was happening. And they realized it wasn't about talent, because women were talented and women were clever. It was actually about institutional structures. And so they put in place some kind of countermeasures to try and fix that. And they set a target. And they set a target to have 40% of our heads of office to be women, and they've actually now exceeded that target 5-6 years later. And some of those measures included things like having women reach out to other women and encourage them to apply. And there's good research that says women will only apply for a job if they feel like they meet nearly all of the criteria, and men will apply if they meet at least some. And so you need to proactively counter that. You need to brief your selection panels on the way that women might choose to present their stories. And women tend to use more language about, I worked as part of a team to do something rather than taking individual ownership for it. And the other big part that they said was it's okay to have flexible work when your kids are young. So I was interested in that example from Indigo of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, because I think that's the kind of thing women need to stay connected to their career, to not drop out, so that once they're sort of through those really intensive child rearing years, they've still been kind of, if you call it, banking career credit, so that when they're ready, they can step forward again. So as you said, I've got 2 young children. My daughters are 6 and just 1. And I've really felt very supported to make a range of choices with them, sometimes having more time at home, sometimes leaning into my career, and knowing that sort of through that, no one is judging me for making those choices.
Yeah, that's just so wonderfully inspiring to hear you tell us these stories, Sneha and Sarah. And for the viewers who are listening to us here, I love that Julia Gillard quotation that you have from your Australian premiere, right? She says, I'm confident it will be easy for the next woman and for the woman that comes after her. Because as I hear stories of you both doing things like this, there's so many young women that go, if she could do it, I can do it too. And at the end of the day, we're all 99% the same. It's just our background and upbringing that is going to be different, but we can actually reach wherever we decide to go, right? Thank you. Lovely that you both shared personal stories. This takes us right into the rapid fire round. So this is the final round. I'm going to invite our panelists to do a rapid answer kind of mode. They call it rapid fire. And I'm actually not sure we want to fire it, but we want to do a rapid round robin. Okay. So I'm going to give you a word and I want you to tell me the first word that appears in your mind when I say it. Okay. Assertiveness.
Necessary for leaders.
Women shouldn't be scared to be assertive.
Important, ensure that it's not perceived as aggressiveness.
Putting myself first.
Always and absolutely.
I think that's the right of every individual to succeed.
We all have to find time for self-care to be strong for others.
Putting myself last.
We have to overcome that as women.
Not always the right approach.
Don't do it. It will not benefit your family either.
Keeping all the people happy all the time.
Not possible. Even God cannot do it.
Not possible.
Impossible.
One life mantra as a champion woman truth Aina had given was only if you ask, you receive as a woman.
I would say pick a profession you like and make your own place in it instead of picking a profession made for a woman.
You can do it the way you want to do it. You don't have to follow the paths that have come before.
And mine is pay it forward. It doesn't matter whether you pay it forward at home, with family, or at work. Distribute smiles and smiles will come back to you.
And the last one, which famous, inspiring person, dead or alive, would you like to have dinner with if you could?
I'd like to have dinner with Lord Krishna if possible.
Oprah Winfrey.
Australia's first female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard.
Great. That was such a wonderful, quick answers that is inspiring us to think like you, on your feet, and be able to embrace the elephant in the room. And, elephants are animals that can hug people and people can hug them back. So why not hug the elephant in the room? And why not dance with the elephant? Thanks.